money.
Today we're talking about 2001's Spirited Away, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. The story follows Chihiro, a 10-year-old girl who accidentally stumbles across a strange fantasy world. This movie is fucking weird. I watched it twice for the review of this properly, but also I've had it on just in the background, sometimes even with the sound off. And one of the most remarkable things about this film is the animation. My God, like the level of detail, not just in the mild expressions going on in the faces of characters, but there's so many different backgrounds. Like 40s, 50s of Disney movies, the animation was incredible, incredibly detailed. And then, you know, from Alice in Wonderland probably onwards, ironically, Alice in Wonderland, another film about a girl going into a fantasy world. From that sort of period onwards, they started going for like a cheaper, easier style. There was a lot of more like recycling backgrounds and that sort of thing. In this, every single background is unique and so detailed. Like I found myself looking at things that you shouldn't really care about in the film. Like there's one moment where Chihiro is climbing up along a drain. It goes to a wide shot. And I was looking at a pipe far, far down, which is obviously must have been a sewage pipe, way below her. And the level of detail on the fact that the brick wall underneath it was smeared in obviously sewage that had accidentally splashed on it as it was coming out. And I was just like, that is like that is a inconsequential detail that doesn't matter. Like it's just insane, the love that goes into the animation in this film.
I also watched it twice as well, both in Japanese. I briefly put on the dub, but it just didn't sit well enough for me, so I turned it off. Yeah, I often see, quotes direct from the director of Studio Ghibli about the amount of torture it is for him to make a film, and it kind of resonates with what you said about the love, because he puts so much effort into each film. He says like it drains him so much, and for him it's like torture, but he does it out of love. And you can see that in Spirited Away. It's fantastic.
He obviously, he describes it literally as torture, making classical artwork, but he hated CGI animation. I guess he saw it as like, there's no struggle to make it, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with because, there is massive talent to CGI. I don't know how it is or how it works, but obviously there's a talent to it. But he despised it. And there is actually subtle uses of CGI animation in this movie at points. But he just hated it, and he hated technology in general. He didn't know how to use a VCR. He described touchscreens as you had to do masturbatory gestures in order to use it, and he just hated that stuff. And sadly, Studio Ghibli actually brought out its first ever completely CGI animation in 2020. It's called like the Woman and the Earworm or something weird. To be fair, I haven't watched it. I've only seen clips, but it just looked horrendous. It looked like bad CGI animation as well. It looks soulless. Everything that is so beautiful about this film is just completely missing, even at essence. Like even just taking a subtle glance. There's something about this film where it's so beautiful. Like in the opening, we see Chihiro stumble across this fantasy world, what seems to be an abandoned Japanese amusement park. And she starts seeing all these spirits appearing, and we see very little of her parents, but the mum seems quite superficial, talking about credit cards. The dad
is a fat pig.
She's worried, literally a fat pig later, but the daughter Chihiro is worried about whose food is this? There's something bad about it. How are we going to pay for all this? And he's saying like, don't, he dismisses it as he has a lot of money, so he can buy anyone, pay for anything, and then they literally turn into pigs. And it's interesting as well, because obviously straight from the get-go, because I was kind of thinking, okay, what's going to be the message at play here? Because I know it's going to be a trippy movie, so there's going to be other messages at play and other themes going on. So I started thinking, okay, so it's going to be about money, I guess, or corporatism. There was a huge amount of theme parks made in the 80s and 70s that ended up getting abandoned or unfinished in Japan. So I think it was, obviously it's used as symbolism in this film, but I think it was quite symbolic in general in Japan of what happened with the economic downturn in the 90s and the lost decade and all that. But then as she gets into the bathhouse and into the rest of the world, and starts meeting all the characters, one of the things I loved is how bizarre and diverse all the character design and all the creature designs were in the film. Some people are humanoid, some people are completely, essentially sort of like half animal, giant talking things. Some things are just unrecognizable, like they don't look like any particular animal or any creature or anything you really know. Even in minor throwaway shots, like, you know, when she's crossing the bridge into the bathhouse, and you see so many creatures in the background, all really uniquely designed, individually animated. It doesn't look like any of them are kind of doing stock movements, like, you know, everyone has the same sort of body and does the same sort of walk. They all look really unique and individual. It is just mind-blowing. Like I said, I've had the movie on in the background the past couple of days, just letting the animation transpire. And some of my favourite moments in the film is the quiet moments when nothing really is happening. There's this Japanese notion called ma, which the director's a big fan of, and it's essentially kind of referring to the moment in between claps. And it's that idea of you calm things down and relax in between the action. And that's the moment where you let things simmer. And not only does it build tension, but a lot of times those moments are kind of the most interesting. That's my headline for experiencing this film. It's the gaps are the most interesting parts, or the gaps are the best parts. And that applies to, what I mean by that, you know, that applies to a lot of films, or essentially all films. It's kind of the same concept as, why are trailers so good, especially in modern times, as we got to the point where it's such a refined art making a trailer. And it's because a good trailer will give you just enough to get an idea and a vibe, but then it will give you these huge big gaps that your imagination fills in. Yeah. And your imagination, the best director of all time, they still won't ever be able to fuck with your own imagination. I feel like that's what storytelling is. Good storytelling is giving you enough information, but then the right gaps. And the better the storytelling, the bigger the gaps. And I feel like the gaps in this film are absolutely ginormous. And they're everywhere. Right at the start, she meets Haku, who's humanoid as well, which seems to be odd because they, you know, characters tend to be very adverse to humans and not like humans, and humans don't seem very common in this world. But he's actually the first person that Chihiro comes across and talks to. And he seems to know her straight away, and he recognizes her straight away. And he helps her, hides her. We see the creepy owl woman that's flying overhead and seems to be looking for Chihiro. And he's helping her hide her, and he feeds her at one point and says, you have to eat something from this land or else you'll disappear. To be honest, I've got my ideas about nearly every part of this movie, but the whole disappearing thing, I'm not entirely sure about. What did you think it was?
I don't know. The only thing that I could kind of guess it would be something towards like looking after the land and like letting the land sustain you. And the other thing is turning into pigs, the whole metaphor about greed and just destruction of everything in your path. So I thought maybe it's something to do with like an environmental aspect, but again, a wild guess. It probably has nothing to do with that. I don't know.
I mean, one thing that comes later is Haku helps Chihiro get into the bathhouse, and he sneaks her in. And as he's sneaking her in, she's walking across the bridge. She coughs for a second. I think if you take a breath for a moment, you become visible. And she does for one moment and becomes visible to
Froggy.
No Face. Well, Froggy, but also No Face.
Yeah.
And this is our first sighting of No Face, who is such a fascinating design, such an interesting character as well. He's not a monster, and he starts off neutral, completely neutral. And like every other character in this film, there's no strict bad or good character. There's some characters that essentially play the villainy role, like we'll get to later, but even then they have grey areas and positive things about their character, and it's so interesting. But he's such a good character. Anyway, she keeps crossing the bridge and gets in. For some reason in this world, she has to work. You have to work. Like, if you don't work, then you're fucked. So she goes to work in the basement with the
spider boiler room guy.
Yeah, so octopus grandfather, or spider boiler room guy, as you said, I think his name's Kamaji. She starts working with him, and this is just such a... Like, one thing that's great about this film is it does make sense in a lot of ways as like a plot, but it is just stream of consciousness at times. Like, it's just so... But you're suddenly just in this boiler room with this octopus guy. There's all these little soot spider creatures that are knocking about, who I fucking like. This is the thing as well. I just love the little moments in this film and the little touches. All those individual little soot spiders felt like little individuals. They didn't feel like they were just cloned animations over and over and over again. She starts working, like, helping him carry coal. And one of the spiders kind of like falls underneath the coal and he's struggling, and she helps him. And then they all notice this, so they all start pretending to do it. And it's totally, and it becomes this funny little moment, and it's inconsequential to the rest of the movie. But it's just I just love it. Like, and there's so, like, even in those little characters, which is essentially just a full stop with a pair of eyes and two little sticks for arms and legs, but they have so much personality to them somehow. Like, they convey through the animation.
Yeah, again, I saw this as a bit of a metaphor of the hard work pays off kind of thing in a. And another kind of aspect of it of you give people an inch and they'll take a mile. Like, they see when all the other spiders noticed it and was like, well, if they're going to do that, I'll do it myself, kind of thing. So that, again, maybe reading too deeply into it, but I always try and see the metaphors between each thing. But yeah, you're right, this was a bit stream of consciousness. Like, sometime in this film, like, the scenes would be taking place and I'll just be looking at it like, what's going on now, kind of thing. And that's why if I'm honest with you and the viewers, the reason I watched it twice is, well, as you said, it's so surreal, and I just felt like I finished it and I had seen it, but for some reason, you know, when you like watch something or read something and you have to go back and like reread the passage, like, I've read it but it's not going in. So I had to, like, re-watch it again because...
Oh, 100%. Like, it's... You text me saying, like, I need to watch it again to know if I liked it or not. And it totally made sense because the first half of the first time I watched it, I was actually just like this is boring. Like, I literally said it out loud to myself. And then the second half, I really started enjoying. And then once I watched it the second time, I just loved it.
These kind of films are not black and white. You know, with like a blockbuster, you'll know what you're getting, like big bangs and big explosions, and you'll just know straight away once the credit rolls, I like that or I didn't. With these ones, it's very much up to your own interpretation of the events that unfold, because in these films, it makes you as the viewer do the work. There's no explaining of anything. You're just watching what's unfolding, and it's up to your interpretation of what you think is happening. It's hard work, but it's also so rewarding.
That is so true, because the weird thing is all the films in, like, my top 10, which I don't have in any particular order, I don't think I liked any of them on first viewing.
I mean, a good comparison to this for me is actually a film that we covered on a previous episode. It's Stalker. I like the film, the atmosphere, it's beautiful cinematography, in the barren landscapes. But again, it's like I'd like rewatch it a second time because I just felt that there was so many like little metaphors that the director was trying to put in. There's no possible way that you could capture it all in one viewing. I feel like Spirited Away is in these veins. I could probably watch it a third time and I've missed something. Do you know what I mean?
And a big part of it as well is you need to shake off your own preconceived perceptions of what it might be about. Because, you see clips, you see the trailer, you hear the name, you get a vibe of what it might be about. I didn't expect it to all center around the politics of a bathhouse that serves spirits, this huge big fantasy world, and it's centered just on this tiny little business, I guess it is. So once you've watched it and you're kind of like, okay, I know what it's going to be about now, so you can shake off your preconceived expectations, maybe even disappointments about what it actually is about, and just watch it again, accepting it as it is, so you can pick up on the rest of the things and the nuances in the characters and the seeds they were planting earlier to foreshadow things that were going to come. But that's the thing as well, is when you think of Western fantasies and the fantasy genre, you think big armies, monsters and goblins, good and evil, very clearly defined. You know, even in, I think, the best fantasy film ever, the Lord of the Rings trilogy and novels, good and evil is pretty clearly defined. And in this, it's fantasy elements. There is evil acts and there's good acts, but they are blurred between many different characters. You know, Haku, who looks after and protects Chihiro, is also a thief and greedy. The big owner of the bathhouse is this character called Yubaba, and she's like this bizarre, wrinkly old evil witch with a giant head. Grandma, fucking creepy, horrible dementia patient. And she's this witch, and, you know, she's evil and she's running the whole thing. And we learn later that Haku is basically her minion. He can morph into a dragon at times. He only started working for her because he wanted to learn all her powers. So, you know, he has bad traits. He has negative traits. Yubaba is an evil bitch who's only obsessed with money and is really mean to Chihiro when they first meet. And she has this monstrous baby character who that is another element.
Fuck me.
Like, you think the movie's been as weird as you can get, and then you meet the giant 40-foot tall Snorlax baby who is a baby but can speak, but can also break a grown person's arm at will, seemingly, because it's so strong, who lives in this room and is terrified of the outside and really selfish and self-absorbed and throws tantrums when it doesn't get its way. But Yubaba absolutely loves it and adores it, and you see a completely different side of her whenever she's with her baby. It's a drama set in a fantasy element, and rather than, you know, defeating great evils, it's characters more just becoming better people. It's the kind of virtue teaching that is far more complex than you usually get in Western animation. You know, Western animation, is the general message, recurring message will be something along the lines of be yourself. It's cool to be yourself, or look after your friends, or family is the most important thing. And those are good messages, but they're very simplified in their delivery. Whereas this deals with really big, strange, complex facts about life and about human nature. And you know, she's at that tender age of 10 where you're trying to shake off, or you're supposed to be at least shaking off, the more obnoxious, self-absorbed, childlike qualities and mature and start to realise that it's not all about you and what you want at that specific second.
This film is the Reddit forum film fans' dream, because one person would be like, no, this is the message, and then another person would be arguing about what they think the message is, and if you see it, maybe both of them could be right, and you have to make your decision. But I think the primary message of this is, Declan, people aren't born bad or good. It's the choices they make in life which make them the person who they are. It's your actions rather than anything else which make you a good person. And that's shown in the film, especially No Face, when he starts just eating everything. Again, greed, and gets bigger and bigger and scarier and scarier. And you've got Chihiro, who's, you know, 10 years old, innocent, and she's just finding her way in the world. And she's shown it from the very start to her dad and mum, don't eat this food, you know, who really grows and becomes, you can just tell she's a good person. She's always looking out for Haku.
Or she turns into a better person.
She turns into a better person.
Because she's quite lazy, quite selfish, quite moany and complainy at the start, a bit sulky, and she develops into a strong person. And that doesn't necessarily mean she just turns into like a badass bitch, because, you know, she's still crying, and she cries more as she becomes a stronger person. She doesn't bottle things up, but she also doesn't shy away from things, which is a much more accurate portrayal of courage. Courage isn't becoming immune to fear. It's being calm in fear and still facing it on and doing the right thing. And that can be when you're seeing something external, but that can also be when you're dealing with something internal, you know, your own emotions or feelings about something, and stopping yourself crying is as fearful as avoiding a conflict externally.
Stopping yourself from crying is, although it's not seen as it in our society, is probably weaker than letting it out. But she becomes a better person, Declan, from the choices she makes. And the thing is, she doesn't always make the right choice, but what she does do is learn from making the wrong decision. She's naive, but she has help along the way from good people, from people who guide her, you know, like the people that assist her in the wash house, put your stuff in here. And going back to, this is what's so good about this film, because going back to the Western fantasy genre, again, as you said, it's so black and white. He's bad, he's good. There's always an end goal. Lord of the Rings, the end goal is to get rid of the ring. Another one, Labyrinth, that I need to get my baby brother back, and David Bowie's the evil wizard kind of character. The never-ending story, again, is another one. With Spirited Away, it's not really, although she's trying to, the main goal for her, I guess, is to turn her parents back from fat pigs into parents. The narrative isn't linear. It goes from side to side to side, which I guess is another message. Going away from the straight path and taking the harder road is less easy, but sometimes you learn from doing that. Sometimes you have to take a side track to get to the end goal, which I really liked as well. And there's loads of this in this film. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So going back to No Face, what a character. He's so interesting because the first time they have a proper exchange is when Chihiro's now working in the bathhouse and scrubbing the floor, and one of the doors is left open and it's starting to pour with rain, and she notices No Face outside. And he's just sort of standing in the rain, so she invites him in, and she's kind of like, I'll leave the door open for you. Because she, you know, and it's just a simple, kind gesture with nothing expected in return. And from that moment onwards, No Face is obsessed with her. He's infatuated by her. Because you get the feeling this is a selfish world for the most part. Everyone in this bathhouse is obsessed with money. You know, all the clients and spirits that come are just there for excess. They want to eat, they want to be bathed, they want to wash, you know. Everyone who works there is they're just obsessed with like squeezing any money out of it. Oh, maybe if I work, this rich guy will give me a few bits of gold. It's all greedy. And I feel like No Face is he's a neutral character. He nearly feels like a sponge, ready to absorb whatever comes his way and then reflect it like a mirror. Maybe symbolic of a young, impressionable child's personality. But he's ready to soak up anything. And he is obsessed with her after this. Maybe it's because it's the only kind gesture that wasn't secretly a covert contract, as in, you know, you're doing something nice on paper, but really you're just doing it to try and get something in return or get some desired outcome from the person. He sees this as just a genuine kind gesture, and he becomes obsessed with her, and he starts trying to follow her around, and he starts trying to reciprocate it. So like there's a moment where a giant sludge monster shows up who needs a bath. Chihiro's trying to, you know, she's tasked with washing him, so she's trying to get the water together, but she needs these tokens in order to deliver down to Octopus Grandpa in the basement to get the water pumped up. No Face appears with hundreds of these tokens trying to give it to her, but once she realizes they're stolen and she only actually needs one, she kind of declines it, and you see he's a bit put out by this. Like he wants her approval, he wants her friendship, he wants something from her validation, but he doesn't know how to get it. It feels like he's David Bowie from The Man That Fell to Earth. You know, he's just landed and he's trying to learn, how do I interact with people? He doesn't have a face, he doesn't have a voice. He only gains a voice once he eats the frogman. And then he starts speaking through his voice and actually taking on his form. Like he starts resembling a giant no-face floating frog at points. He learns from being in the bathhouse that gold has value. So then he starts magically producing gold out of his body. And he realizes that he can get whatever he wants with this. So he starts getting all the food he can want. He starts getting all the comforts he wants. You know, he starts getting weighted on hand and foot. But when he sees Chihiro running about as she's trying to save Haku, who's been seemingly nearly killed while going off and doing a mission for Yubaba, he stops her and he tries to give her a huge handful of gold. But she's not interested. She's like, oh, thank you, but no, I'm okay, thank you, I'm busy, I got to go save my friend. This is when he seemingly snaps.
It was the whole thing of metaphor of greed again. And when this film came out in year 2000, so over 20 years ago, that little monologue that you described there about, you know, the people trying to squeeze every penny and, like, you know, they just want everything to excess. It rings true. It's a good reflection of the world today. So this film must have done a good job if the message it's portraying reflects real life now, 20 years later. Do you think No Face is probably a reflection of corporatism as an entity. Like, he's just floating around and like pumping out money, and everyone's like running after him, but then they're getting eaten up by this big entity, as in corporation.
No, I don't think he's a representative of that. I think that's going on in the background and he's interacting with it. But I think he is a representation of your own psyche that you try and cultivate in a certain direction. You know, you have your own psyche. You're not, if everyone was totally in control of it, there'd never be any issues. No one would ever go to therapy. There would be never any problems with interrelationships. But there is. Yeah. You try and cultivate it. You might try and, I don't know, just do basic things like, try and be a good person, but also meditate. You might try and eat healthy. You get good sleep. You try and, in the moment, maybe not lose your temper when someone's annoying you. But you can also get drawn into toxic ways of being. You can get seduced by hate or by greed, and you can put all your life and soul into that. You can never challenge yourself and just go into comforts and instant gratification. And I feel like he starts off totally neutral, goes on a journey where he is drawn towards those negative aspects, and he becomes a worse and worse person. He becomes a literal monster. And then when he, towards the end, is purged of that and gets drawn towards positive actions or positive habits and positive people, he becomes a good person. So I think he's a total malleable mirror of what you do and what you choose to be and the person you are.
This is why I love this podcast, actually, and secondly, why I love film as an art form, because I've seen it as something totally different to what you just explained, but now that you've explained it, it makes much more sense than the thing that I came out with.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know. I'm digging some of your theories as well.
No. I've done a lot of work on this myself. I call what you call psyche the inner voice. And what I've noticed about the inner voice is it always starts out as you're a piece of crap or whatever, but then when you work on it, you can make your voice, love you. It's what I see it as, Declan, is if you think positively, positive things will happen. And that's kind of what happens to No Face in this.
And it's kind of that mirror thing again, where what you feel and what you think shapes what you actually see.
Exactly.
And then how that shapes how you act, and then you become a mirror of how you see the world, and then the world sees you as you see it because you're acting in that negative way. Going back to the plot a little bit, so he offers her the gold when she's on her way to save Haku, because she saw him fighting with a bunch of paper bird things. I don't know. Great, beautiful sequence, but that's still one of the things I don't quite even have an idea of or theory on. But he flies up. She goes up to look after him or try and help him, and she discovers Yababa. That's when she meets the baby as well. And Yababa goes into the other room to check on the baby, and she discovers the 3 tennis ball heads trying to push him down a hole. I guess to kill him, dispose of him. He's not needed anymore. And she saves him. And one of the paper clips, or one of the, paper bird things, reveals itself to be Zeniba, Yababa's twin sister, or possibly even the same being, but flip side of the coin of it. And she is literally they don't even give her a different coloured dress or anything. She's just the exact same looking character. Which again, what is that about? Is that the duality of man, good side and evil side? I don't know. But anyway, she is I guess a good witch, but again got some messed up qualities. And she immediately shrinks the giant fat baby monster down into a tiny little gerbil, and the owl scouting woman into a tiny little bird, and turns the 3 tennis ball guys into what appears to be the baby, so that when Yababa gets back, she thinks that's the baby, and she doesn't even recognize that it's not. Again, maybe because they're just looking at the superficial and not looking at really seeing into what's underneath and the spirit of a person.
It was at this point in the film, where it's revealed to be the good twin or whatever. I was they're flabbergasted. I was like, well, this can't get any weirder. And then I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. Do you know what I mean? So, it was just funny.
So Haku and Chihiro falls down the hole, and they end up in the basement again. Earlier, we forgot to say the sludge monster, she helped clean him off and he turned out to be this river god or river spirit. And he gave her this little bit of sort of weird food pellet thing, which is essentially, I guess, like a medicine. And she's been doling that out again through the rest of the movie to various people who needs it, saving her just enough to try and give to her pig parents. How ridiculous is this movie when you describe it? So anyway, so she gives a little bit to Haka when they're in the basement as he's still in this dragon form, and he morphs back into his human form and seems to recover, and he coughs up this little stamp, essentially a letter seal, which has been stolen from Zeniba. This gets rid of the spell Yubaba had over Haka, so that he had to basically be her slave. So Haku is still completely unconscious and still virtually dying, I guess. Chihiro resolves to take the seal back to Zeniba and apologize and get her forgiveness. So in order to do that, she has to get a train ride. And we've been seeing this train that's going along what looks like an ocean or a lake, but it's actually just the flooded area in between where she came in to the amusement park fantasy world. And there's this recurring thing about water and a river in this film. There's the talking of river spirits. You know, when she cleanses the sludge monster, which turns out to be a river spirit, she is for a moment engorged in water in a bubble that floats up to the ceiling. And she looks nearly like younger for a moment. And then she talks to someone later in the film where she kind of has a flashback or tells them about when she nearly drowned in this river and she lost her shoe. And we see little sprinkles of this throughout the film. You know, we see where she loses her shoe when she's in the basement with the soot monsters and she can't find it, but they bring it back to her. And see these little things like it's nearly like the fantasy world is trying to make her remember something that she can't quite remember. She remembers a little bit, she remembers drowning, but she doesn't remember all the details of it. She only really remembers it because her mum reminded her and told her about it. It's nearly like a repressed memory. But anyway, so she gets a ticket on the train and she heads off to Zeniba. And with her, she decides to bring No Face because No Face has kind of gone through his own purging. He goes crazy and starts chasing her through the whole building, and she feeds him some of that medicine stuff she got from the river spirit, and he vomits up like a load of shit. Actually vomits up the 3 people he swallowed gradually over the course of chasing her. And as he does, it seems like he's purged everything and he's neutral again. But he's still infatuated with her. So he follows her, he gets on the train. There's a beautiful sequence where they're just looking out at the beautiful animation of all the landscapes as they're traveling. And they reach Zeniba's place. And they go in, and it's this lovely sequence where she kind of... Nothing happens. There's no real big, like, clash. There's no big, like, you've brought my seal back to me. She just kind of says, okay, well, you may as well hang out here for a bit. And they start knitting, and she teaches No Face how to knit, and she's, you know, patting him on the back, being like, wow, you're really good at this. Like, you're actually good at something. And it's fascinating how, compared to before where he was getting all this instant gratification and he turned into this big, greedy, selfish monster, when he's getting this sort of setting where he's being taught something and encouraged as he's actually actively learning a skill and doing something, and he brings out this wonderful side of him. And when Chihiro leaves, he decides to stay, and you kind of see like, it's, you know, he's going to be fine with Zeniba. He's going to, you know, grow as a person or a shadow monster or whatever he is. And it's nice. And you also see this whole time the giant baby in gerbil form. So you catch yourself saying sentences sometimes. The giant baby in gerbil form has also accompanied her, and you see in his little tiny gerbil expressions and moments, you see him growing as a person as well. They arrive back, and basically Yubaba is furious because that monster caused all these problems. No Face damaged the whole area, and all the gold he got barely covers it. She's cost him a fortune, and she's furious. The gerbil returns back into his proper baby form, giant baby form. He's now not scared to be out of the room. He's standing by himself. Like she says, like, you're standing, who taught you to stand, blah, blah, blah. And he actually stands up for Chihiro in the face of his mother. So you see he's come all this way, and you see, you know, Yubaba does have that one kind side of her where she's melts like butter for her giant baby man thing. She agrees if she can figure out which of the pigs is her parents, she'll be able to go home. This was a kind of only underwhelming part of the film for me, because she just kind of realizes, oh, none of them are my parents. Yeah. And they all turn back into humanoids or whatever they were before they were turned into a pig. And they say, oh, you solved it. Fair enough. Your parents are over across the river. Yeah. Back the way you came. And that kind of solves there. And it was a bit like, it was underwhelming because it was kind of the big finale. But it was also underwhelming because the moment before it was so beautiful and amazing, where when Chihiro goes to leave Zeniba, she goes outside and Haku is waiting for her in dragon form, and she climbs on his back and they're flying back home. And as they're flying, she remembers again about drowning in the river, and she realizes, oh, you were the river. You're a river spirit and you're in this world as in human and dragon form, but in reality you were the spirit of the river in my hometown, and I nearly drowned in you. And I lost my shoe and I fell in and I was drowning, but you saved me and you carried me to the shallow waters. And this was your name. And she tells him the name of the river. And as she says it, he suddenly loses all his scales and turns back into a human, and they start to fall, and she's crying as they realize, oh, that's how I always knew you. But she'd forgotten about him, but he remembered her, but he couldn't remember how. Because a big thing in this fantasy world is your baba will steal your name and then you'll completely forget who you are, which seems to be one of the big messages of the movie, about never forgetting who you are and knowing yourself. But they fall, and it's, you know, with the beautiful musical score in the background, and it's just amazing. What did you think all that meant?
I guess humans respecting nature, humans being at one with nature, and nature helping returning the favour, as in Haku, the river spirit, saved her from and pushed her to shallow waters. If you're respectful and you fear nature, water, the elements, you'll be okay. But if you mistreat it, you'll die, kind of thing.
You know, I think you do have a real good point there, because she says how the river's not there anymore. We've built over it, and it's no longer there, and that's part of the reason I think why Hacker now lives in this realm and doesn't remember who he was. But the moment he remembers his name, he kind of remembers everything. And it's just such a beautiful sequence. And for me, that is the finale that precedes the sort of phony finale in a sense. That is the big, beautiful moment of the film. And I don't know if it's repressed memory because of trauma or it's just to serve the themes and the plot. But it's just such a beautiful moment where this thing she's been trying to remember this whole time. And like I said, with the soot things bringing her lost shoe, like she talks about losing in the river, which is why she started drowning. And the amount of importance water has throughout the movie, and the amount of times, you know, when she's cascading the outside of this giant bathhouse, the peril is falling into the waters below. And it's a recurring thing. So I don't know if it's a repressed memory that the fantasy world is trying to get her to face up to and remember properly, or not, or it's just to serve the plot. But either way, it's just such a beautiful sequence. And it's interesting, the very final shot, you see it, she comes out and she discovers her parents and they get back to the car. I appreciate the fact that they showed that the car had been there a couple of days, even though the parents couldn't understand it, which I love, because I hate when, if they just showed it like it really none of it ever actually happened, I'd be pissed. I'd be like, fuck you. I hate when movies do that. To hammer home the theme of the film, it's interesting also, and hammer home what we've been talking about, the difference between, you know, Western fantasy movies and Eastern fantasy movies, and just movies in general, is that in the dubbed version, which I watched the second time, they have a voiceover line at the end as they're driving along that isn't in the original Japanese version, where they say, are you nervous about moving to this new area and meeting all these new kids at school? And she says, no, I think I can do it. I prefer it not being in the Japanese one, because it just feels like too much extra. But I gotta be honest, without it, it did feel like sort of a bit of a sudden ending.
But what I was worried about, you know, that whole figment of imagination thing that you just said. When I first watched the film and they started flying, and it turns out Haku was a river spirit, I was just watching it and like, oh, they're gonna reveal it. She died, she drowned, and all of this was some sort of weird heaven, purgatory kind of area. You know, and she's dead, and I'm so glad that wasn't the case. I was like, oh, thank goodness for that.
Do you know what? It didn't even occur to me, actually, yeah. But that just goes to show.
It's by the by, anyway.
But it's also, I have no idea if anything I'm saying is right. It's just what I was getting out of it. What a beautiful movie, man.
As I said, I'm not really a fan of these kind of films, but from this viewing of Spirited Away, it makes me want to check out the rest of maybe not that CGI one you talked about, but the rest of Studio Ghibli stuff. Like, I'm definitely going to check out Howl's Moving Castle, 100%.
I agree 100%. I want to start getting through all of these back catalogue of movies and anime in general. I'm a fan of anime in the sense I'm a fan of the ones I've seen, but I just haven't seen that many. It's just one of the few film genres I really haven't got stuck into. And there's something beautiful about it, and one of the most beautiful things is they're obviously going to be great films because they're regarded so highly, but there's something great about culture of filmmaking that hasn't carbon copied the Western Americanized form of filmmaking like so many other countries have. And it's part of the reason why Japanese, and then in the past 20 years more Korean, but Asian filmmaking in general is so unique and interesting, and it's that difference in style and storytelling and values and the way it respects an audience differently.
Watching this film was like a breath of fresh air. It was something so different from the films I'm used to, and I really came away from this film feeling a real sense of, not only because of what the film portrayed and the messages, just contentment. I was just content. I just felt happy.
Yeah.
And like, you know, just with a bounce in my step. So I couldn't recommend this highly enough.